And a very good morning to you. And before we talk about what Lungisa Fuzile had to say, just a very quick wrap-up of Pravin Gordhan's wrap-up.
Well, interesting, Yuveka, that at the end of his testimony, his evidence on this theme of state capture, he really addressed the EFF without naming them and went into these allegations against his daughter Anisha Gordhan, who's been incorrectly and erroneously called Anusha, among other things, and describing really what he gives as her profession when she was working in the private equity office at Investec, saying there was nothing untoward about her involvement in several companies listed in an EFF statement, only one of which, according to corporate records I've checked, she is still a director of, and that she didn't benefit from these directorships. She was in a non-acting position on most of these companies, and that she did so as an employee of Investec, a salaried employee of Investec, who had stakes in these businesses and wanted to keep an eye on them. Of course, he hasn't given us documentary evidence to that effect, and in some ways it almost strikes one as similar to what happened when Floyd Shivambu spoke in defense of his brother Brian Shivambu, when we didn't have paperwork or documentation to prove or disprove any of the allegations in the Daily Maverick, and they've now followed up with another article with more evidence and information from sources on what the EFF gleaned from VBS banking. But that aside, Pravin Gordhan ending with a quote from Nelson Mandela on Mandela's dislike and displeasure in any kind of racism, whichever man or woman, whatever race the man or woman is who delivers it, and also quoting a famous poem about not acting when they come after the trade unionists, the socialists. He sort of tweaked the language of the poem, but really encouraged people to be wary of this kind of politics of distraction, as he called it.
We heard from former National Treasury Director General Lungisa Fuzile, also, dropping the bombshell, as we know, also talking about former President Jacob Zuma and what happened when we had that finance minister take the post.
Yes, and he may not have drawn big crowds of demonstrators, but Fuzile has, as you rightly characterized it, really dropped some bombs. He also said that he was effectively, and sort of speaking idiomatically, hit by a rock between the eyes after Ntlantla was fired, and Enoch Godongwana phoned him to say that he was going to get a Gupta minister along with a Gupta minister's two advisors. He later learned from discussions with Ntlantla that he was on a list of 4 advisors in National Treasury who'd been flagged, it seems, by the Guptas to be fired because they were some kind of obstacle to whatever nefarious ends he alleges the Guptas of wanting to achieve. But let's just take a moment to have a listen and a look at what Fuzile had to say on the stand yesterday.
He then persuaded me to extend my contract. And I said, look, I can only do 2 years at most, but I can guarantee giving you 1 year of my time. And I said, of course, given the high turnover of ministers of finance, I suspect that you will most likely be my last minister.
All right, so we expected to continue hearing from Fuzile today. Aaron, just where did he leave off and where is he expected to pick up this morning?
Yes, well, there you hear him talking about, it was Pravin Gordhan who said when Fuzile was in Treasury and Gordhan returned, I want you to stay on, and Fuzile agreed to do so and spoke about this revolving door, not resolving, I think quite the opposite, revolving door in National Treasury, something that Advocate Vincent Maleka also discussed, and they're due to traverse that in more detail. What we know, Yuveka, from some of the testimony already is that Treasury was on Gordhan's evidence and in fact that of Nene earmarked. It was a target for capture, and of course that's not surprising. It's government's ATM, it's the money bags, and so we should hear more of that from Fuzile, who's already given a lot of detail, in fact saying, for example, that it seemed to him that the objectives and targets, the aims of the Guptas seemed to also be that of the then president. Now, interesting, because that aligns with what Gordhan said yesterday, accusing then President Jacob Zuma of misleading leading cabinet on the nuclear deal, for example, also on the possibility, not in law, but just in politics, for cabinet ministers to intervene in the relationship between the Guptas and their banks, who decided to close accounts after 72 dubious transactions had been flagged. And so Fuzile will give us more insight into what was happening in National Treasury, such a crucial ministry, not only because it's the money, but because it then disperses finances and monies to other government departments that are meant to provide social services. So we're likely to get a lot of detail on that today. And I dare say, crowds or no crowds, it's sure to be interesting.
It was always all about our money, wasn't it, Erin? Okay, thanks very much for that. You should continue to keep an eye on what happens there at the state capture inquiry. And Lungisa Fuzile expected to continue his testimony. Thanks, Erin Bates.